Truck driving can be a very dangerous career at times, and that's part of the reason why truck drivers deserve better pay, because they're constantly in situations that could be very dangerous. And I can recall over the course of the years that I drove a number of times when I thought, you know, what have I gotten myself into here? And then a lot of it came from accepting loads into places where I didn't know the neighborhood that I was going into at the time. I remember accepting a load into the San Francisco area, just around Candlestick Park, and I'd called ahead from Reno to get exact directions into the loading dock, and I was running ahead of time, and I got a hold of the receiver and I said, you know, do you have a good facility down there? Is it okay if I come in tonight and sleep down there, backed in against the dock? And his response was, oh no, don't come in here after dark. And I remember thinking, oh, that's odd, but it tells me something. So fair enough, I stayed up in Sacramento for the evening, and the next day I strolled in. I was into this location by the loading dock, just by Candlestick Park, and I was backed into the dock, and it was a dead-end street, and just at the other end of the dead-end street, just a couple hundred feet from where I was backed in, there were these young teenage boys standing up on a dirt hill, throwing rocks at my truck as I was being unloaded. And at the time, my truck was, the particular truck I was driving was a week old. It was its first trip. And I was pretty touchy about it. I didn't want dents in it. No time did I ever want dents in my truck, but these kids were pitching rocks, trying to hit my new Peterbilt. So the owner of the warehouse where I was unloading saw me starting to head up the hill after these kids to get them to stop throwing these rocks, and the guy grabbed me and said, no, he said, don't go up there. The fathers of those kids have Uzis, and that's the projects up there. That's a housing project up on that hill. I thought, well, I guess I better stay here and just try to shield my truck as best I could. And happily for me, the kids didn't have a throwing arm good enough to hit my truck. So anyway, I finished unloading and I was heading out of there empty. I was going down to Salinas to load, but I had to drive past this Candlestick Park housing project. And all these kids knew that I would have to take this road to get out to the highway from where I was. And when I got out to this road, they were all standing along the side of this road with rocks waiting for me to come by. And I was lucky. I accelerated hard, swung to the other lane, which was empty, and they missed the truck completely. But I remember thinking, you know, if I hadn't have known better, if that guy at the warehouse hadn't have told me, I'd have gone up that hill after those kids, and I'd have maybe met some angry father with a gun. So I was thankful that turned out as well as it did. I didn't end up with any dents in my truck, and I didn't end up being confronted by an angry father with a gun. I remember another time I accepted a load of orange juice out of Florida going into the docks in New Jersey, and that was fine. And I got up into New Jersey, and turned out that where I was taking the orange juice was a Coca-Cola plant, and the longshoremen up there in Jersey were on strike, and they were picketing this Coca-Cola plant that I had to go into. Well, the load broker had failed to mention that detail to me, so I got in the gate in fairly good order, because it was before 7 a.m. when I got to the gate, and they let me in right away. And by the time I was empty and getting out of there, it was after 8 o'clock, and the picket line had fully assembled. And I thought, oh boy. So I eased my way out through the electronic gate, and then the police were there, and I eased my way out through the picket line, but I noticed that a group of 6 guys got in a car and proceeded to follow me. And I had noticed this, and I thought, oh man, here we go. And I was so scared that I got out of Jersey there, and I don't think I stopped for the next 300 or 400 miles just to make sure they'd given up and turned around, because I sure didn't want to be confronted by these guys with axe handles in a truck stop parking lot around midnight, you know, when I finally stopped. And I remember thinking, you know, I'd have never accepted that load if I'd have known the longshoremen were picketing that place. Another time, I was down in South Carolina, and I was delivering a COD load. And I thought the standard procedure for something like that is they give you a bank draft or a certified check. And they took me into the warehouse. It was a textile warehouse, and took me up to the cash office, which was right in the middle of the plant, in front of all these workers, and proceeded to count out $2,200 cash in my hand to pay for the COD load, with 100 or so of these factory workers looking on. And I remember thinking, oh man, I didn't want to be traveling with that much cash. It was an uncomfortable feeling, boy. Once again, I didn't stop for hundreds of miles after I got out of the plant. I skipped dinner and everything just because I thought I wanted to be well out of that area before I stopped, just in case someone decided to follow me out and retrieve that cash from me. I accepted a load one time into the Loop in Chicago, downtown Chicago, and they refer to that area as the Loop, right in the downtown core area up against the lake. And it was a good paying load, and I needed to get into that area. So I took the load and I got in there, and I believe the area was called Caprini Green. And I remember getting in there after having quite a time, because a lot of the transit system rail ran over top of the road system, and a lot of those bridges, overpasses, were too low for me to get under. And I wiggled my way in through there, and finally found the loading dock that I had to get to. And you know, it was like a early 1900s era loading dock, and I could hardly put my trailer in there for the size of it. And I was stuck halfway out onto the street. It was a terrible spot to get into, traffic whipping by all the time, and then I had trouble finding my way back out of that area because of these overpasses, these low overpasses with the Chicago transit system running overhead. And I remember, running back and forth every few blocks to see if I could find an overpass that was tall enough for me to get under, to get back out to 94. And that was a harrowing experience. It was starting to get dark by that time, and it was not a nice neighborhood. And I certainly understood after, an experience like that why a lot of the American guys carry guns. Frankly, I sure wish I'd had a gun a couple of those times. But it was a scary deal. In my trucking career, I hauled air freight for a little while, and I delivered into JFK Airport fairly regularly. And JFK Airport's a large complex, but there's not a whole lot to eat right within the airport. So one of the dock workers had told me about this little diner on the outskirts of the airport proper there, and I thought, well, I'll bobtail over there. So I had dropped my trailer at one of the airline docks and bobtailed over there for lunch. And while I was having lunch, they hijacked a guy, some hoods hijacked a guy and took his truck right out of the diner parking lot, right where I was parked, right, and I could see it from the front window of the diner where I was sitting. They held the guy at gunpoint and took his truck. And I remember thinking, here's a neighborhood I won't be back to. In my travels coming out of Canada and into the States, I almost always crossed at the Ambassador Bridge. And sometimes when they did construction on the ramps onto I-75 and I-94 coming off the bridge, they would divert traffic from the Ambassador Bridge, and you couldn't get directly onto the highway. You'd have to go down Fort Street. And in the late 70s and early 80s, Fort Street was nothing more than a glorified slum in most places. And I remember traveling down Fort Street after clearing customs a couple of times at 1 or 2 in the morning, and thinking that, boy, Fort Street was the wrong place to be. I sure didn't enjoy those crossings, and I started crossing at Sarnia after that, because Fort Street was just downright dangerous at night back then. One of the deliveries I did into JFK Airport, I got into the airline to unload, and they told me that their facility there on airport proper was maxed out for capacity, but they'd rented warehouse space off the airport and gave me directions to this warehouse, and it was a few miles away, and I wasn't particularly happy because no one had told me of that. And of course I was doing those extra few miles and that extra hour or so for free, of course. But I went down off airport proper and found this little warehouse and banged on the door, and a partition slid open, and a guy with a gun peered out at me and asked me what I wanted. And I said, I'm here with, this airline's air freight. They've sent me here. I think I've got the right place. He goes, oh yeah, you're in the right place, but he says, I had to check you out. And he come out and look at the truck to make sure I was really a truck driver. Carried the gun and kept it kind of on me the whole time in case it was some sort of a scam. And then backed me in, and he said, I'll unload your trailer. He says, but you best stay out here and keep an eye on your truck. And that's exactly what I did, and I could see why, because the locals were starting to take an interest in it. And he wasn't long unloading me, but I was glad to get out of there. I had a friend of mine running across I-80, and most I-80 is pretty good. And he pulled into Little America for the night and found a quiet spot in the back of Little America, got out of his truck, and two guys jumped him with tire irons. Now Neil was a big guy, like 6'5", 260, 270. We called him Smooth, and these guys jumped him in Little America in the back of the lot, one of them with a tire iron, and got Neil to the ground because of the tire iron, and then took off. And Neil could never understand why they had jumped him. They never tried to take his wallet or anything, but he remembered there had been some trash talk, some Rambo trash talk on the CB coming through Wyoming, and the best he could figure was that these guys had mistaken him for the CB Rambo and decided to jump him to take, because they took offense at what they thought he had said. Only Neil was a quiet guy. He hadn't done any talking at all, but that was all he could figure. He was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, and it was a case of mistaken identity. But two guys in a tire iron, they hurt him. And thank God Neil was such a big guy, or they might have done more damage. Back in the early 80s, I was pulling a lot of hanging beef, swinging beef, and I'd loaded a load up in Alberta going down into New York City, and it paid really well. And I was leery about going to New York City. I'd never been before. It was my first time to New York City, but It had directions into this cold storage place where I was going, and it seemed fairly straightforward. I checked it on the maps, and it looked all right, and the money was too good to turn down for me. So I'm coming out of Alberta, and it brought me, New York City was fairly close to home for me, and I thought, well, I could grab something short out of there, pop up into Ontario, and be home for a few days. So I took this load of swinging beef and worked my way over and got into New York City, and found this warehouse where I was supposed to be, and it was they wanted me there. Most cold storage places wanted you in there like at the crack of dawn, so I was in there about 5 in the morning, I guess, and got me ahead of the New York City traffic anyway. So I backed in with the doors closed, unit running against the dock, and the guy came out and woke me up about, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7, I guess, and said, pull ahead and open my doors and back it in again. Guy had a white coat on, like most meat plants and cold storage places would, long white coat. So I did that and backed in, and he said, man, you're out of Alberta. He says, I didn't think we'd see you guys back after that last load. And I said, what do you mean? What happened with the last load? And he said, well, one of your guys came down, somebody banged, and he was backed in the same way as you did. Somebody in a white coat banged on his door before we got in. He must have thought that these guys worked here. He pulled ahead and got out of the truck to open his doors, and they killed him and took the load. And I thought, I never checked his ID when I pulled ahead and got out of the truck. And I certainly hadn't heard this story about the guy before me being killed. Nobody bothered to mention that part to me. Maybe that's why the load paid so well. I don't know, but I remember thinking, that could have been me. I just looked at the guy's white coat and the clipboard, pulled ahead and got out of the truck in New York City at 5 o'clock in the morning, not thinking about it. And I thought, boy, there's how easy it can happen. I had one friend that was coming into Barstow one night, and everybody knew that you had to clean and wash your truck before you went into LA, so he decided he was going to take the time and get his truck washed and get his ducks in a row and have a big sleep and head into LA in the morning before the traffic. So he stopped at this, back then they called the High Desert Truck Stop outside of Barstow. Stopped in there to get the truck washed, and he was just kind of standing around, and all of a sudden he said he could hear helicopters in the air, and LA SWAT raided the truck stop with helicopters from the air. He said they were all coming down on ropes, and they had machine guns out. They surrounded the truck stop, and it turned out that the people at the truck stop, or somebody in the truck stop, had been selling drugs, and the LA force had decided this was the night they were going to bust the truck stop, and they surrounded this truck stop and held everybody and checked all the trucks and went through everybody's ID, and it was hours, Jamie said, before they got to him. But once they found out that he wasn't one of the group he was looking for, he was again just in the wrong place at the wrong time. And sometimes that's all it takes to get yourself hurt or killed. And truck drivers are always in different places all the time that they're not familiar with. That's just part of the job. So it's pretty easy for a truck driver to accidentally end up in the middle of something or someplace where he has no business being. And that's why now I suggest to everyone that they have an intimate knowledge of wherever it is they're being sent by the dispatcher, just to make sure they don't end up in harm's way. And look at that poor fellow out of Indiana that parked outside Thiesencorp in Detroit just to try to wait for his appointment time, and they killed him. ThyssenKrupp wouldn't let him in the gates, and he sat outside the gates and was killed. And there was no need for that, I don't know if he knew the kind of area he was going into or not, but ThyssenKrupp, there's no doubt they should have let him in to keep him safe. But they had some sort of stupid company policy, and all sorts of these big companies have that, where they won't let trucks on the lot before their appointment time, and they have no problem at all risking a driver's life and letting him sit in a neighborhood like that poor fellow did. And it's just, trucking can be a dangerous enterprise and occupation, and you've just got, and nobody else cares. It's got to be you that takes care of yourself, and you've got to do it hopefully before you get into these situations, rather than find yourself in the middle of these situations and then have to try to survive it. It's better if you can be proactive and just refuse loads into these places, or call ahead and find out what the deal is, if they're going to let you on the property, and if it's fenced, or if they've got security, or how it's going to work, because no load is worth your life. But the companies have no problem putting you into that situation, so you've got to protect yourself. So bottom line, be careful out there, watch where you're going, take steps to protect yourself, be thinking ahead always. Keep the rubber side down, take care of yourself, and I will see you on the backhaul.